As the ground split apart, Damien calmly slipped his hands into his pockets and lightly kicked off the falling rocks to gain momentum. Looking straight down into the abyss, he thought that it was incredibly deep and vast. Glancing to the side and seeing someone screaming in panic, he silently observed that the gale unleashed by the sudden detonation was scattering everyone. Watching them fall freely, he mockingly reflected that the holy knights were as tenacious as cockroaches and had likely managed their own landing safely. He then pondered the situation more seriously. The fact that an entire mountain had been hollowed out as a trap explained why the dungeon entrance was located halfway up the slope. A sinister smile formed on his lips as he coldly mused that Corpse Play had prepared quite a grand grave for himself. Upon landing, Damien noticed Denicio meditating ahead of him and felt a brief flicker of confusion. He called out in doubt, addressing him by name. Startled, Denicio turned around and exclaimed in shock that it was Damien Haxton. A moment later, Denicio closed his eyes and concentrated, channeling divine power to envelop his entire body. Observing this, Damien cast a disdainful glance and thought that this specific self-regeneration through divine power was why he called him cockroach-like. Meanwhile, Denicio trembled and cursed under his breath, angrily remarking that of all the people to fall with him, it had to be Damien Haxton. Damien coolly noted that now that only the two of them were there, Denicio had finally dropped the formal honorifics. He then indifferently suggested that if Denicio hated the situation so much, he could go his own way, as he himself intended to move ahead. With that, he waved a hand and turned to leave. Seeing this, Denicio panicked and hurriedly grasped his spear. His blue eyes flashed beneath sharp lashes as his gaze narrowed with resolve. In an instant, he dashed forward at lightning speed, thrusting the radiant blue spear through the air. Not at Damien, but at an invisible monster floating directly before him. He warned Damien not to lower his guard, reminding him that they were currently inside a dark mage's dungeon and that acting alone was dangerous, so they should move together. Damien lowered his eyelids slightly and leisurely reflected that he had allowed Denicio to be because he was curious how he would act, never expecting him to move for his sake. With faint curiosity, he asked whether Denicio had not hated him. Denicio immediately turned his face away, hoisting the spear onto his shoulder and proudly admitting that he did indeed hate him. However, he declared that if Damien died, Agnes would be heartbroken, so he intended to keep him alive. Taken aback, Damien followed behind and teasingly remarked that Denicio must fancy Dame Agnes. At that tone, Denicio jolted, his face flushing red as he shouted for him to shut up, telling him to stop spouting nonsense and just follow. Turning away, he muttered through clenched teeth that he honestly could not stand the way Damien was watching him. Damien silently thought that for some reason, Denicio overlapped with that bastard Abel. Suddenly, sensing something, Damien's expression turned grave. Above Denicio's head, a terrifying red-eyed head materialized. Denicio froze in a cold sweat just as a punch descended. Damien swiftly pulled him back. Stunned, Denicio stammered in shock, asking what that was. As the dust cleared and a silhouette emerged, Denicio hesitantly wondered whether the figure was human. Damien immediately denied it, telling him to look closely and explaining that it was one of Corpse Play's creations. Frowning as he stared at it, he thought that the more effort its creator had poured into crafting a flesh golem, the more human-like he had made it. A humanoid flesh golem, what Corpse Play had called his masterpieces. When it lunged forward, Denicio rushed ahead with his spear, expressing disgust and proclaiming that he would purify it with the power of God. He thrust forward in fury, but the ice coating his spear shattered the moment it pierced the creature's body. Watching it continue its frenzied charge, he gasped as he realized that his divine power was dispersing. In the next instant, its punch struck him squarely, sending him crashing back into a rock wall and falling heavily to the ground. Denicio forced himself up, trembling as he realized in disbelief that his divine power was not working. Hearing this, Damien stared blankly and exclaimed in shock, refusing to accept the situation. He stepped forward and summoned his sword, gripping it tightly before launching himself ahead and delivering a powerful slash down the monster's body. Glimpsing the core within, Damien coldly remarked that Corpse Play must have already known from this point in time. Fixing his gaze on the orb, he recognized it as a magic artifact and declared inwardly that he knew the son of a bitch who had made it. Doggo. Snatching the orb out, he heard the monster shriek. Annoyed, he glared upward and ruthlessly swung his sword from multiple directions, crushing its body into pieces. Seeing Damien's blood-soaked hand clutching the orb, Denicio shrank back, his face paling as sweat poured down. After a moment of silence, Damien tossed the orb toward him and told him to take it. Confused, Denicio asked what it was. Damien coldly instructed him to have the order examine it, explaining that it would reveal why his divine power had scattered. Recalling his previous life, Damien reflected that the order had discovered the countermeasure far too late and the damage had been catastrophic, but this time he had struck first, so they would uncover a solution much sooner. Curling his lips faintly, he calculated with satisfaction that such a splendid chance to utterly ruin that bastard falling into his lap was truly delightful. Looking at Dionisio, he asked whether he could move. Startled, Dionisio immediately stood upright and affirmed that he could. Their voices echoed through the cavern as Damien questioned the sudden politeness, and Dionisio awkwardly replied that it had simply felt like he should. As they walked deeper, Dionisio asked how vast the place was, addressing him as Sir Damien and remarking that it seemed like a massive cavern. Damien thoughtfully replied that if it had been carved out from inside the mountain, it must be enormous. At that moment, a delicate voice called out playfully. Both of them turned toward the sound. Across from them, Sanyus waved cheerfully, asking whether they were both alive and remarking how glad she was to see them again in one piece. Dionisio stared in shock while Damien calmly addressed her as Lady Sanyus, noting that she had made it safely. However, he coldly inquired about the object she was holding in her hand and asked exactly what it was. Gamal, whose neck was tightly gripped by Sanyus, gasped painfully. Seeing this, Dionisio cried out in alarm for brother Gamal. Fixing Sanyus with a frigid stare, Damien demanded that she explain herself. Elsewhere, Agnes gently touched the badge on her chest and activated her divine power to envelop her body. From ahead, Margarita turned back and anxiously asked whether Agnes had fully recovered. Agnes replied wearily that she had, addressing her as senior, and then asked about the others. Margarita could only shake her head, looking helplessly toward the corpses among the rubble. She said that it was no use and that the regular holy knights were all dead. Suddenly, a sinister voice rang out, asking whether the materials were already there. Hearing this, the two women immediately turned around in vigilance. From the opposite side, Del Rant approached and mockingly remarked that they had fallen right where he was, and that they both had terrible luck. He smirked and inquired whether the other individual had perhaps landed in a different location. Margarita frowned and shouted, demanding to know his identity and commanding him to reveal himself. Del Rant sneered in response, retorting that questioning who he was truly hurt his feelings. He added that they had come there specifically to kill him, had they not? At that, Margarita raised her voice in suspicion and asked if that meant he was truly the target. He craftily introduced himself, confirming that he was indeed the one they referred to as Corpse Play and expressing his sincere pleasure at meeting his new research materials. Agnes gritted her teeth in absolute fury, her eyes nearly blazing with intensity. Back on the other side, Dionisio cried out in alarm when he saw Gamal being strangled, calling out desperately to Senior Gamal. Meanwhile, Damien stared coldly at Sanyus and demanded that she explain exactly what was going on. She raised an eyebrow indifferently and stated that Gamal had been ambushing their various sect members while they were scattered, so she had simply taken him down. Dionisio immediately stepped forward and insisted that such a thing was impossible, asking why his senior would ever commit such an act. Sanyus replied coolly that she had no idea, adding that finding a traitor in a hellhole like this was a total cliché. Dionisio hurriedly insisted that the entire situation was a misunderstanding. Sanyus provocatively asked whether Sir Dionisio was perhaps in on the scheme as well. He quickly denied the accusation and urged that if they did not believe him, they should arrest them and take them before the order's trial. Damien, glancing aside, thought to himself that something was not right. He then coldly pointed out that two second-class holy knights of middle-class level had supposedly attacked him simultaneously. Yet, the area was not a total wreck. He added that compared to the battered Gamal, Sanyus looked far too fine, observing that her body bore no visible injuries or signs of grime. He narrowed his eyes and firmly declared that the real traitor was actually her. She responded with an embarrassed yet sly smile and admitted she supposed she could not successfully fool him. Dionisio demanded to know what she was talking about. Without hesitation, she suddenly turned and punched him straight in the face, sending him crashing violently into a rock behind him. After striking him, she calmly remarked that it should now be obvious she was the one ambushing them. Releasing her grip from Gamal's neck, she added lightly that he and Sir Gamal were both remarkably weak, and that weaklings like them should not represent the order's main sect. Raising both hands in a fanatical gesture, she declared that Dazzling Pain should be the true face of the order. Damien asked what she planned to do once she became the leading sect. She replied disdainfully that the current order had grown far too soft and mocked the so-called heretic Inquisition as a complete joke with a sinister sway. She added that heretics deserve nothing but summary execution and that they would fix the order to restore the glory of the old days. Damien waved the hand holding his sword and asked whether she would actually kill her own comrades for that goal. She calmly answered that she would not. The subjugation team had simply died in battle inside the dungeon, which would naturally make her sect the heart of the order since they were the only ones left with real power. As soon as she finished speaking, her subordinates summoned their weapons and advanced. Damien readied his stance and frowned, thinking that it was all complete nonsense and that even her so-called grand betrayal had ended in total annihilation in his past life. At that moment, two of them rushed forward, swinging an axe and a shield at him. Seizing the opening between them, he swiftly unleashed a crushing wave, slashing forward with his sword and defeating both of them at once. Sanyus watched in shock, thinking that he had taken down paladins reinforced by authority in a single strike. In an instant, Damien dashed forward and appeared right before her eyes. He pressed the tip of his sword against Sanus' throat and unleashed the Sword of Calamity. However, Damien suddenly became utterly horrified when his sword tip only grazed Sanus' neck. Sanyus calmly asked whether he was really going to try her. At the same time, the ring on her hand abruptly began to glow. She swung it in a wide arc, launching a direct attack at Damien. In that instant, he hurriedly leapt into the air to evade. Nevertheless, the stone wall behind him shattered immediately upon taking the blow. Frowning, Damien thought to himself that it was a defense capable of blocking his Sword of Calamity and that it possessed lethal attack power as well. Sanyus then calmly asked how much he knew about the authority of Dazzling Pain, explaining that their power was enhancement. She stated that it boosted physical statistics, the density of objects, and even a weapon's sharpness, and that they could enhance almost any concept. The ring in her hand quickly sprouted a sharp blade with clear excitement. She continued by saying that as one reached higher levels, one could stack the effects and use them more frequently, and she asked whether he had known that. Waving her weapon enthusiastically, she added that she could go up to 30 times while Damien dodged her relentless attacks. Damien reflected inwardly that he was fully aware of it, as he had previously fought Radiance, one of the 5 great saints. He recalled that back then, Radiance had crushed thousands of undead simply by using 100 times gravity. As she continued attacking, Sanyus remarked that she had heard Sir Damien possessed a special technique for deflecting incoming magic and questioned why he was only dodging. Hearing that, Damien sidestepped and mockingly replied that although she was reinforced, her attacks were far too predictable. At the same time, he calculated inwardly that the inside of all flows consumed more mana depending on the strength of the attack, and that with his current mana levels, it was becoming difficult to keep up. Suddenly, Sanyus withdrew her weapon and took a step forward. In the next moment, she stomped violently on the ground, shattering the earth and sending Damien flying backward. Seeing him driven against the stone wall, she mockingly declared that she was finished with dodging now. At that moment, Damien cautiously thought that it was time to gamble a little. Immediately afterward, he gripped his chest tightly with all 5 fingers. Sanyus could not understand what he was doing. At the same time, his hand clenched around his own heart inside his chest as a crimson surge of energy radiated from Damien's body. Sanyus was stunned and wondered whether it was aura. Then she realized his mana levels were shifting rapidly. Staring at his chest, she angrily concluded that he had pulled some kind of trick. Sanyus then decisively poured energy into her weapon, thinking frantically that she did not know what he had done, but she would finish him before things became dangerous. Just as her attack was about to strike, Damien curled his lips into a faint smirk. He released his sword and activated Insight of all flows, causing Sanus' attack to veer off to the side. Seizing the opportunity, he drove a powerful kick straight into her. Under the astonished gazes of Gamal and Denisio, Sanyus was sent flying backward by Damien's strike. Maintaining his composed stance, he stated that if he could not cut her, he would simply have to get a little rougher. Pale and bewildered, Sanyus observed that his mana was suddenly spiking and questioned how that was possible. On the other side, Damien unleashed his surging energy in fury and declared that it was time for a beating.